It is my honor to introduce our next speaker for the session, Dr. Ashwati Madhukumar. Ma'am, I request you to please come to the stage. I would like to welcome Dr. Ashwati Madhukumar ma'am, Assistant Professor of Law at the Indian International University of Legal Education and Research, Goa, who will be speaking on the topic Criminal Identification Act 2022. A prominent scholar and educator in the field of law, Dr. Madhukumar holds an impressive academic background with degrees in BBA LLB Honours and LLM in Criminal Law, culminating in a PhD from the esteemed Indian Law Institute, New Delhi. Dr. Madhukumar is a UGC NET qualified academic, recognized for her significant contributions to legal scholarship and education. Her teaching portfolio includes subjects such as criminology, juvenile justice, and criminal justice administration, where she emphasizes both on theoretical foundations and practical applications of law. A prolific researcher, Dr. Madhukumar has published numerous articles and book chapters that dwell into pressing issues in criminal law and human rights. As we welcome Dr. Ashwati Madhukumar to the stage, we are not only privileged to hear from an accomplished scholar, but also from a dedicated advocate for justice and social reform. I would now like to call upon our faculty coordinator, Ms. Purvi Baliga, to present the bouquet. Thank you, ma'am. I now request ma'am to kindly address the gathering.
Thank you very much. I will try to live up to the description that was given now. So, hi and a warm good afternoon to you all. Now at this time I realize that I am the only thing that is standing between you and a very sumptuous lunch that is supposed to follow. So I'll try to keep it as crisp and easy as possible and as less sleep-inducing as possible. So you only read law textbooks or do you all read literature? Anybody who reads proper just fiction literature? Okay. Anybody heard of somebody named Victor Hugo? Have you read his work or seen the movie that is titled Les Miserables? It's an old movie, it's a classic because Victor Hugo writes what you could call melancholy classics, so sad stories basically, sometimes with a very happy ending. So one of his prominent works is called Les Miserables. It is a huge 2-volume book, but if you are interested in the movie part of it, there is a movie adaptation also. So some of you might have studied a very small excerpt from that book in your school textbooks. There's the priest and the prisoner and the candlesticks.
Yes.
Where a priest is also involved. You remember that one? Yes. So this is a part of his novel. Why it is relevant is it talks about recidivism and the labeling of a person as a prisoner. Because the novel opens with when this person, who is the protagonist as well as the prisoner in this case. So his name is Jean Valjean. And he has been imprisoned for the offense of stealing a loaf of bread because he belongs to a very impoverished background and his sister was starving and her sister's children were starving, so he steals a very small loaf of bread from a baby. So he gets arrested for that, he gets imprisoned, and this is happening in a very old place at a very old time, so he does not have any money to buy or to cultivate anything. So for this he is imprisoned. After the imprisonment, he tries to skip the prison. He basically tries to escape, so that leads to another offense. So and then he again tries to escape, that leads to another offense. So in total, he stays in prison for over a decade or around 2 decades. Whereas his initial offense was stealing a loaf of bread when he was hungry. So the relevant part for us comes when the novel is opening because finally he has been released from prison, but at this point, because of the constant exposure, he has become what you would call prone to recidivism. You understand recidivism? The tendency to commit an offense once again and so on and so on. So the point of identification comes when he has been released from prison and and he's trying, it's very cold, he's been released in winter, so he's trying to find a shelter. But since he has been released from prison, he has a paper of identification which specifically identifies him as somebody who has been a prisoner. So every lodge that he goes to, even a house barn that he tries to enter in, the people recognize that he's a prisoner or he's a convict. He is somebody who has been accused of an offense. They all shoot him out. So that is where the novel opens, and eventually the candlestick part comes because finally the priest of the church takes him in, and that is when his transformation into somebody who is legitimate that comes in. But let's see that part apart. So the core aspect of where Victor Hugo tries to touch your mind as a reader is when he talks about how the labeling works, which if you read criminology also, part of the labeling theory to begin with also, it addresses that criminal, a person is not the person is not born as a criminal, and it's not the nurture also that makes him a criminal, but it's the label that makes him a criminal. That's the core assumption. So here also it is the same that Victor Hugo is talking about in terms of a novel. So it's a fictional adaptation, but the core idea is that philosophical idea. Now, of course, fiction is very far from what you would say is the real world or the living world, but what fiction does for you is why it is important for us as people who read the law also, that it expands your imagination and thought process. It urges you to imagine things that may be outside of the lived reality that you see around. So you need to think beyond that and outside the box. So coming to that, why criminal identification on the practical side you find that it is important in order for the purpose of investigation or sometimes in order for say law and justice administration also to identify a person. But what happens in way of the identification is that knowingly or unknowingly the person gets branded, that this person has at least been accused in a criminal offense. So that brings us to the Criminal Identification Act of 2022, which is the basic topic that we have to deal with today. The Act itself is not very huge, it carries around 10 sections and it's a very small piece of legislation. If you take the Gazette of the Act, it's around only 5 pages, you can easily read it. And what it connects with is the new law, previously, the criminal procedure basically, previous law under CRPC, now under BNSS. Now, identification of a person who is accused of a crime or who has been convicted of a crime may be necessary for reasons such as, of course, law and justice administration as well as for the purposes of investigation, as well as mainly for the purposes of identification also of certain factors which may amount to evidence. So prior to the enactment of this 2022 Act and irrespective of that anyway, the General Criminal Procedure, which was previously under the CRPC, and now under the BNSS, it allows and it gives powers to the police officers to require that evidence must be collected from a person who has been arrested. So when you read the powers of a police officer after arresting a person, now under this one, CRPC it was 53 and 53A, under BNSS it is 51 and 52 and then 53. These sections provide for the police officer's power to require that an arrested person be examined by a medical practitioner. There is another section that is 53 which gives the right for the person who is arrested to be examined by a medical practitioner also. The logic here is slightly different because initial provisions 51 and 52 is the power of the police officer to require an examination. The idea is to collect any evidence that may be on the person's body. Say for instance blood stains, or if it is a case that relates to sexual offences, then semen sample, blood sample, DNA, everything could be collected as part of the police officer's power given under the BNSS 51 and 52. 51 is the general section, 52 specifically for the offence of rape. So this is a little more detailed, that's the difference. 53 of BNSS on the other hand is the right of the arrested person rather, that you will be examined by a government medical practitioner in order to protect your rights as an arrested person. So we examine your body to make sure that you are not carrying any marks which may indicate custodial violence. So that in the later production before the magistrate, you know that this person between the previous medical examination post-arrest and by the time he is later produced before the magistrate has been tortured or so on. So this 53 is separate. It goes in favor of the accused person. 51 and 52 on the other hand are part of the police officer's power. So you have to collect all this data. And similar data. So the power was already there under the General Criminal Procedure anyway. But what the 2022 Act does is to consolidate this power specifically in a very specific manner and to expand what kind of data may be collected. So under the BNSS also we will collect the same sort of data, including fingerprints could be there, DNA could be there, blood stains, blood samples could be collected, or any medical examination could be done. Now this brings us to another question that in Constitution you have a right right against self-incrimination. So that is it. So one person called Katke Kalu Okhad, this case becomes very important because in state of Bombay versus Katke Kalu Okhad, a challenge was made to this section saying that this collection of evidence from my body. So if I am an accused person, if you are collecting some evidence from my body and you are using it against me, then it amounts to self-incrimination. So something from me you are taking and then you are using it as an evidence against me. So the court had to look into the legality of collecting medical samples and using it as proper evidence. Because under the section 51 and 52, there is no concept of consent. So if I am an arrested person in an offence, the police does not have to ask me to consent to get this medical examination done. It is mandated under the law. In fact, in order to execute this medical examination, the police are also given the power to use any reasonable force that is necessary to execute the medical examination. So that is not limited in that sense. But technically, when you read it back to the use of force in order to arrest also, in order to execute an arrest also, the police officer is bound to use some power if required. But that force is limited to the extent of not causing death. So force can be used, but the force that is used should not cause death unless the offence for which I am supposed to be arrested is also punishable with death. So when it comes to the police officer's power to use force in order to execute an arrest, there is a specific mandate of restriction that is given. There is some sort of a cap on the use of force that can be there. Medical examination 51, 52 sections also put a sort of cap, but the cap is not specifically spelled out. It only says any reasonable force. So your consent as an arrested person does not work here. You will be subjected to medical examination as a part of this. So Katke Kalu Okhad was saying, when you're forcibly taking this evidence out of me and then you're using it against me, that amounts to a violation of my constitutional right against self-incrimination. Court had to interpret it. Now if you're thinking about it practically, what else do you do? The evidence on the person's body, including blood samples or semen sample, everything, all of that, fingerprints analysis, all of that will become a very important part of continuing the investigation. So you cannot ask the police to investigate, find the culprit also, and then at the same time tie their hands also saying you cannot collect this piece of evidence. You may always not find ocular evidence. Ocular evidence in the sense somebody has seen it. Eyewitnesses are there or so on. There may be cases where that is not there, you have to depend on this kind of evidence. So the court said that the right against self-incrimination particularly is limited to your testimony. So what the Constitution protects you is that you will not be asked to testify against yourself. Anything that you say cannot be used against you. You cannot be compelled to say anything as such, which is anyway protected under the provisions of BNS as well as Evidence Act, now the BSA, Sakshi Adhari. Because it specifically says, for instance, that your confession to a police officer cannot be used against you unless a recovery or a discovery of a fact has happened in consequence of what you have said. So under that protection, in the case of State of Bombay versus Katke Kalu Okhad, the court said that anything that is procured from you in terms of a medical examination, that could be used in evidence against you and that does not amount to self-incrimination. So possibly medical evidence can be taken using force and that taking of evidence can be used against you without violating your constitutional mandate of non-self-incrimination. That was said already. Now at the same time, another case was there. This was Neeraj Sharma versus State of UP. That was 1993 Supreme Court. This person said that what about the discomfort that happens to an arrested person? Because you have to realize at this point he is not a convict. He has not been convicted of an offence. You are suspected and because of the suspicion you are under arrest. Right after the arrest you may be subjected to this examination which is very invasive in nature because we are talking about medical examination, not only limited to the collection of blood or sputum or sweat. All of that is included but not limited to that. So the textual examination may be a little invasive also in nature. For instance, you must have come across news of smuggling of indigenous narcotic substances, gold, etc., which happens when people enter India. Sometimes these materials you don't bring it in a bag or stash in your hair or so. Sometimes people injustice, as it's in your bowels. Or sometimes people even stuff it up in their rectum. So imagine the kind of examination that you have to do on a suspected person to even find this material. So Neeraj Sharma, the person was saying, what about the discomfort and pain that is caused to the person because of the medical examination? Supreme Court said that it is justified. Any pain or discomfort that may be caused for this reason is legitimate. It is a part of the process. So any reasonable pain or discomfort that is caused to the person is part of the permissive part of the law. So that is justified. So as an arrested person, you may be subjected to invasive examination also, but that is necessary for the other side. You see that what criminal law constantly tries to do is to balance both of these sides and you cannot ever attain a perfect balance there. Sometimes you're violating the rights of the accused person who has not yet been convicted. He may be acquitted also at the end of this. So why did you go through all of this for no reason? But that is where you have to compromise, because on the other side you have to also balance social interests in order to conduct a good investigation, collect evidence, and to attain the possibility of conviction also if this person is a suspect. So the constant balancing is there. So as a part of the balance also, the Supreme Court said this case was Neeraj Sharma versus State of UP. It was Supreme Court 1993. Said that any discomfort or pain that is caused due to a reasonable medical examination permissive under these sections is legitimate. You cannot do anything about it. It is bound to happen. Then under this, yes. Now what this one does, that is the Criminal Identification Does Act of 2022 does, is to take this examination one step forward. So what you see is that under the general procedure also you could have collected a lot of personal data of the person, including biological samples and DNA profiling and all of those data as well. The Act specifically expands this. So what this Act says is it defines something called measurements. And as opposed to the previous Act of 1920, which was repealed by this particular Act, the 1920 Act was titled as Identification of Prisoners Act. This one is Criminal Procedure Identification Act. So it has expanded the number of people that it applies to also, and also what comes under the definition of measurements. So the 2022 Act defines measurements as a very wide category of things, including your fingerprints, palm impressions, foot impressions, DNA profiling, analysis of DNA profiling, blood, sputum, semen, other samples and all, iris and retina scan, and all information is coming under the ambit of measurements. Then, who these measurements could be taken of? There are multiple categories under section 3. One, it can be taken of any convicted person that is convicted of any offence which is punishable under any law in India, not only limited to BNS, which is criminally punishable under any law in India, then that person is a convict, his measurements could be taken. Second category of persons is who have been required to give security of good behavior. So those people also measurements can be taken. Third one is the category of arrested persons. Any person who has been arrested with an offence punishable for any law, punishable with any offence under any law in India. So here, 1920 Act on the other hand, the previous Prisoners Act that had limited arrested persons and convicted persons measurements. So only those people who have been convicted for offences punishable with rigorous imprisonment, or people who had been arrested for offences punishable with rigorous imprisonment. This Act expands that category. It doesn't mean that the offence that you have been convicted of must be punishable with rigorous imprisonment. So the threshold is brought down. Even if you are convicted of any offence, irrespective of kind of punishment, the moment you are convicted, or you are arrested for any offence, irrespective of what the punishment of that offence could be, which means relatively less severe offences also would come into this category. So measurement, that is including all of this data, iris scan, fingerprint, palm impression, footprint, DNA, all of this information could be taken by the police officer. Similarly, any person can be required by the magistrate to take measurements, to provide measurements under this. So when it comes to the power of the police officer, it is limited to these categories: arrested persons, persons required to provide security, or people who have been convicted. When it comes to the magistrate, his power expands to any person who may be required to give these same kinds of data in relation to any case or any requirement that is going on under the law. So the magistrate, the logic possibly being that the police officer is a part of executive, so the criminal procedure code anyway gives more powers to a magistrate who is considered as somebody that is more neutral, because he is a part of the judiciary, so he is given more powers. So any person cannot be required by the police, but he may be required by the magistrate on the other hand to give the same kind of data. Similar power in order to obtain this data, which is given under BNSS, is also given under this Act also. That is, your consent does not matter. You don't have to consent as an arrested person or as a convict to provide this data. This data under the powers of this Act could be procured by the police or the magistrate as the case may be, using reasonable force as necessary. So your consent does not come into picture here also. And anyway, because of Kathikalu occurred, there was no question of challenging this Act under this violation of self-incrimination. So that has already been dealt with. Even though the same point was dealt with under a different legislation, which was at this point CRPC, subject matter is the same only. So raising the same question again does not arise. It has already been decided in Kathikalu, so you cannot challenge on the basis of that. On the other hand, challenge had been raised on the basis of what amount of data has been collected. Because if you compare it with the previous Act, the 1920 Act was even a smaller piece of legislation, around 3 pages only if you look it up. This one has around 5 pages, around 8 or 10 sections in both acts, so it's not very huge. But under the 1920 Act, considering also the time when it was enacted, it was back in 1920, so they only provided for taking the measurements in terms of finger impressions and foot impressions. Because there was no question of iris and retina scanning, DNA and all of this at this point. So the 1920 Act, it was very narrow in the ambit of what data could be collected. Only these data could be collected, plus photographs could be collected. That was that. Under this one, on the other hand, there is a whole plethora of data that could be collected. All of this data pertains to your biological and physiological constitution as well. Because it's your retina scanners there, all of your DNA information, DNA profiling, all of that is there. So the Internet Foundation, Freedom Foundation of India, which is a civil liberties organization which works towards securing your digital freedom and protection of your digital data, personal data basically. They try to challenge this under that aspect. Because you cannot challenge it under the constitution, Katikalu has already decided it, so they challenge it on the other aspect of how a lot of personal data is being collected under this act. Also, another part of this act specifically, now you have collected this data, either the police have collected this data or the magistrates already have collected this data. What happens to it? The same act of 2022 provided that this data could be consolidated and stored from the state by the National Crime Records Bureau, NCR, which is the basic data collection and statistical organization. If you have come across NCRB reports and all, they are the ones who collect all the data and give out statistics of categories of crime, state-wise division, and prisons and convicted persons and so on and so on. So they have also been given the power to retain this data. So the data may be collected at the level of states, but this will be retained at the central level. And again, the act, you must know the difference between an act and a rule, right? Act is what it's more permissive in nature. It gives certain powers, it lays down certain mandates, etc. So when the act says this is legal and this should be done, a corresponding rules will be released by the center which exactly will tell you how this will be done. So the act said that this data could be collected, it will be kept at the NCRB. Then to examine the legality, you also have to wait for the rules. Rules also, same rules. Criminal identification rules of 2022 also came out. But the rules say that how do you collect this data and all, how do you maintain this data, it has to be in an encrypted format. But how this will happen is left to be decided by the NCRB itself. So think about it as a ping pong ball game. You have shifted the ball from one court to the other. From the act, you had to know the rules. But when the rules came out, the rules are saying that the manner of collection of data and all will be decided by the NCRB. NCRB could decide it by way of what the rules say of standard operating protocol. So an SOP has to be released by the NCRB. From what I could find out, an NCRB SOP is not yet there. So we are waiting for how the NCRB SOP will say about the collection and storing of this data. So data could be collected, rules say an SOP you have to wait for what the NCRB says. That is the full picture now. At the same time, it only says that it has to be stored in an encrypted manner. So if it is digitally stored, it has to be stored digitally only. If it is not digitally collected, then you have to convert it into a digital format and store it in a digital format only, in an encrypted format. And the previous lecture it has elaborated on what happens to digital data also. On the top of it, you have a digital personal data protection bill, the act which came up in 23 as well. But that is more with respect of your personal data which you have consensually given to something that is called a data fiduciary. So the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023 tells you about when your personal data may be deleted and so on. So if you have consensually given some personal data, say to a website, then you can require that it should be deleted under the rules and the acts of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. But this law, any data that is collected under this law, the standard it is different because this is not something that you have given consensually. This for a particular purpose of criminal investigation has been taken by the state. So that there is no direct, these acts are not cognitive in nature. They are not speaking to each other. One is separate and the other is separate. But the same challenges of any data that is kept digital, it never erases, it's always there. That will pertain to this kind of data also, but it will be there. Then why Internet Freedom Foundation wanted to challenge it was also because of the wide ambit that is given to the definition of measurements. Also that it is unconstitutional in the nature of that the number of people who are brought under the ambit of this act, it has also widened. Convicts are there, arrested persons are there, people asked to give security and all are there. One of the most important aspects was with respect to the deletion of it. Under the 2022 Act, it says that your data may be deleted. So if you have been convicted, if you are a person under this, NCRB collects your data, it will be deleted at the end of 75 years. So it is only a quarter less than a century. So you have gone under the earth also, the data still remains there for up to 75 years. So that is something that IAF tried to challenge. But when this case came to the Supreme Court said that removed of the court, but the court told them to approach the High Court first and then take it up with the High Court regarding the constitutionality. Then the Supreme Court will look at the opinion of the High Court also. So if the High Court is allowing it, then well and good. If the High Court rejects it, after that it will come to the Supreme Court. So saying that, and this happened in 2024 only. So we have yet to see how this case will proceed now. So when the Supreme Court said that Internet Freedom Foundation has withdrawn this case with liberty to move a High Court. So that is the legal scenario happening with this act as of now. Then another slightly revealing factor of the act is, however, that if suppose your data has been taken under one of these provisions, but then you are acquitted in that case. Whatever case for which your data was taken, either as an arrested person or as a convict, but after that you have been acquitted in that case. Then after the exhaustion of all legal remedies, so whatever revision was there, appeals are there, after the exhaustion of all legal remedies, then your data will be deleted, subject to the fact that you have not been convicted for any previous offense. So if you have already been convicted for any previous offense, at that point your data was not taken, suppose this act was not there, because the offense and conviction happened prior to 2022, then all of this data might not have been taken. Conviction happened later, however, you have been arrested for a separate offense which happened after 2022, so your data has been taken under this. Now you are acquitted in the second case. Your data will be deleted only if you had not been convicted for a previous offense. If a previous offense is there, your data still remains, despite the fact that you have been acquitted in the subsequent offense. Now, on top of that also, NCRB has been given the power to also disseminate this to authorities, and it is not limited, it does not say national authorities, but in terms of investigation. If the data needs to be shared with other authorities also, it has the power to share. Now, how that will happen also, since the rules don't say exactly how that will happen, it will ultimately boil down to what the SOPs of the NCRB itself says. So, how the act will actually pan out will depend upon that also. Then, this particularly, all of these questions we are looking at, now not to say that it is not necessary. In order to conduct a successful investigation, the collection of certain data may be necessary, because using this data which you have in a database, say for instance for a person who is prone to multiple offenses, subsequent offenses. So that person's data may be required to identify him as a potential culprit or even to rule him out as a potential suspect in a subsequent case. So the requirement is there. So it is not that the entire act or the logic behind the act is problematic, but it is the wide ambit that is given which has led to the institution of cases. Now, on top of it all, the challenge primarily it boils down to your right to privacy, which was mentioned as a fundamental right in the Kutteswamy case also. So your right to privacy is there. But again, your right to privacy is subject to the procedure established by law. So since this is a procedure established by law, directly speaking, it comes under that only, unless you are able to challenge the just and reasonable aspect of it, which the IAF Internet Freedom Foundation was trying to do. If and when they approach a High Court, we will see how the jurisprudence on that develops. As of now, it is there. Then, there is something also which addresses this to some extent, that is the right to be forgotten or the right to erasure. Right to erasure as a concept developed in the European Union. It was one Mr. I might be pronouncing this wrong, it's Consteja's case, Spanish person. So, Mr. Consteja's case was civil in nature basically. He was going through some financial difficulties. So, on Google he put up a particular advertisement to sell some of his immovable property. After that, after a while his financial difficulties were resolved, so he was well off again. But the advertisement remained, because something you put on the internet, it doesn't completely go away. On the digital platform, some of the other data always is, the advertisement was still there on Google. After that, when his financial difficulties had ended and all, later when he was trying to acquire some sort of financial help or a loan or something, he was still good, but he wanted some data, some loan or something, then that loan was rejected to him because he was presumed to be bankrupt because of the other advertisement which was there. The advertisement said that he wanted to sell off some property. It was a long time back. His financial difficulties ended. Later, when he is trying to improve his finance by getting some finance from external sources, previous advertisement, his potential donors are looking at the previous advertisement, because of which they feel that he is still bankrupt, so he was not getting the financial aid. So he went to the European Court of Justice to ask Google. He proceeded against Google to take this data down. Because of this case, the concept of the right to be forgotten or the right to erasure was established. That your data on the digital platforms, after a while, if you consented to put your data there, after a while this data would be erased. That is, it is gone. It will not be there at all. But this right particularly limits to the European Union only because it came from the European Union, so it does not extend as such to India. In India, however, this came up in the Karnataka High Court, in fact, in the case of Sri Vasunathan versus the Registrar General. This was a 2017 case. Interesting fact is the name of the case is there, and this is the irony of it. But if you look at the case, the name is redacted. So if you just search the case, Sri Vasunathan versus Registrar General, you see the judgment where the name of the case is redacted. It will say name redacted in bracket versus the Registrar General 2017. Irony is that because of the right to be forgotten, his name was actually redacted. But because it was already referred to in certain papers, the name was still there. Like I also told you, so the name is still there, and this is about the digital data. Despite the Supreme Court's order that it was a Karnataka High Court order. So the Karnataka High Court asked to redact this. Name has it redacted in the judgment as such. So if you see the copy of the judgment in Indian Canon, it says name redacted. But you know the name because it's already present there because it has been referred to in a couple of other papers and so on. So in that case, what happened was this particular person, the petitioner's daughter, had filed a case of dowry harassment and such in respect to an annulment of marriage. And the husband had sort of quashing of this case. The case already was going on that annulment of marriage should happen and a couple of other criminal offences were all there. Later, the husband and the wife entered into a compromise. After that, the case was quashed under 482 CRPC. The case went away. After that, but when the quashment petition was filed, the title of the case reversed. The husband was the petitioner, the wife was one of the respondents in that case. Now the quashing all happened and everything was good, but the data because of the case, including if you look at judgments and all, you will see that all personal data, including all identifiers, your address, everything was there. So everything, this woman was one of the respondents, so all her data was there online. So she challenged the Registrar General of the court to remove all of this data. Because my name is coming up in respect of a criminal case, everything has been resolved. The background of the case is resolved, but my name and my details, including all personal identifiers, are available on the digital platform to remove the whole. So the Karnataka High Court ruled in their favor and asked everything to be removed. But the irony, like I said, despite the name being redacted, and technically still there because it is case, because it is a case law, it's a precedent. It has been referred in a couple of other papers and all. Name is still there. Only good thing is that the woman who wanted her name to be removed, it's not her name, it's her father's name. Because the father was a petitioner. He was not anyway. So that case particularly addressed the right to be forgotten for the first time in India. That there can be a right to be forgotten or the right that your details should be erased altogether. Such a concept might be there. It came to India also. So this act as such in 2022, the Criminal Identification Act, which puts up a lot of your data with the NCRB also. Despite in an encrypted format, the risk of this data ultimately being online matters. And this right to be forgotten may be one of the challenges which could be taken up against it. Now, in another case before the Supreme Court, which will solidify this right if it was decided by the Supreme Court, this was a case which was filed in July 2024. So it has yet to be decided, it has been posted. This was a person who was accused of an offence of rape. So his data is there. And if the offence happened before 2022, then his data would also have been collected under this act as well. So that person's data is there. But he was acquitted later in the offence of rape. But apparently when he applied for a foreign citizenship, I think Australian citizenship, the country denied it because when you look at the backgrounds, antecedents of the person, you see this allegation was there. He was acquitted as a different thing altogether. But once the allegation was there, the stain was already there. So this person's citizenship was rejected. So he approached the Supreme Court asking that his name and everything should be deleted from all the data such that his name does not lead to this criminal antecedent, even an allegation at all. So in that respect, the Supreme Court has agreed to look into the question of the right to be forgotten, but that is yet to happen because the case was filed in July 2024. So considering tendency, you can imagine it's going to take a while for the hearings to happen, judgment to come out, and so on and so forth. But that is something that has some bearing on the Criminal Identification Act as such. So just to sum up, the Act as such gives the power to the police and to authorities of the prison and to magistrates to collect data which is your biological and personal data including data such as your fingerprint, palm prints, footprints, iris scan, DNA profiling. Also, behavioral data. Behavioral data has not been defined. It has been made an inclusive definition that the behavioral data includes your signature. Apart from your signature, anything could be your behavioral data. Since it's an inclusive definition, it's not bound to anything. So aspects of your behavior also come under the definition of measurement, which should be collected and kept by the NCRB as well, which may be shared with other authorities as well, which will be retained for 75 years, which will only be deleted if you have been acquitted after you have exhausted all your legal remedies and also subject to the fact that you did not have any other previous legal conviction. Then only it will be deleted. So this is the general scheme of the Act. This is wider than the corresponding 1920 Act which was there, and the Act may get challenged in the High Court by Internet Freedom Foundation. If that happens, then we will see how the jurisprudence goes. Other laws which may have a bearing on it, we looked at the Kutuswamy case and privacy, and also the right to be forgotten as such, which is generally speaking a European Union perspective, but which the Supreme Court of India also has said that it will look into, so that jurisprudence will also affect this Act. So that's the general idea of this. I hope that.